The steel door clangs shut behind him. Jesse Hoffman sits alone in a cell the size of a parking space. Not on death row anymore. Somewhere different. Camp F. The execution unit. Outside, trustees mop floors. Inside, he knows what that sound means. They've moved him to the death house. It's March 2025. He has 72 hours left. This isn't theory. This isn't a movie. This is the documented psychological reality of what happens when a human being knows the exact moment they will die. Angola, Louisiana State Penitentiary. The largest maximum security prison in America. 5,000 inmates. 85% will never leave alive. But death row is different. Because on death row, every man knows his ending. The transfer to Camp F is the final checkpoint. The last movement. According to corrections protocols developed in 2025, condemned inmates are moved from their death row cells to an isolated holding cell within the execution unit several days before their scheduled death. No more appeals. No more delays. Just waiting. Hoffman's hands shake as guards deliver his final meal request. He declines. No last words prepared. His Buddhist meditation practice, the breathing exercises that kept him centered for years, now impossible behind the gas mask they'll strap to his face. 14 minutes. That's how long the nitrogen will flow. But the psychological death that started the moment he heard the warden's footsteps approaching his cell. This is Angola. This is death row. This is the final transfer. And this is what really happens in those last 72 hours. Angola wasn't built to rehabilitate. 18,000 acres. Former slave plantation. The name itself comes from the African country where enslaved people were taken from before the Civil War. Now it holds the condemned. Death row at Angola is housed in Camp F, a fortress within a fortress. According to Louisiana Department of Corrections documentation, Camp F contains 4 cells designated for condemned inmates awaiting execution. Each cell measures 6 feet by 9 feet. 54 square feet of existence. The men on death row aren't mixed with general population. Can't be. Security protocol dictates complete separation. 1 hour of recreation per day. Alone. In a cage. But here's what most people don't understand about death row. It's not the execution that kills you first. It's the waiting. Brownie Heber knew this. Executed in 2002 after 17 years on Angola's death row. Court records show he attempted suicide twice during his incarceration. Not from guilt. From the psychological deterioration that medical experts call death row phenomenon. The human brain isn't designed to live in countdown mode. Dr. Craig Haney, a psychologist who studied death row conditions for over 30 years, documented what happens to condemned inmates over time. Anxiety disorders develop within months. Depression becomes clinical within the first year. Hallucinations, paranoia, complete dissociation from reality. These aren't exceptions. They are patterns. At Angola, the routine is mechanical. Wake at 4:30 a.m. Head count. Breakfast through a slot in the door. 23 hours in the cell. 1 hour in the recreation cage. No physical contact with other human beings except when guards restrain you from movement. The isolation creates a specific kind of psychological damage. Patrick Saunier experienced it. Executed April 5, 1984. His case became the basis for Dead Man Walking after Sister Helen Prejean documented his final months. In her testimony and published accounts, she described how Saunier changed in the weeks before his execution. A man who once maintained composure began experiencing night terrors. Refused to sleep because the dreams were too vivid. He told her the worst part wasn't dying. It was knowing. Knowing the date. Knowing the method. Knowing which guard would walk him down the hall. The death warrant changes everything. When a Louisiana governor signs a death warrant, the condemned inmate receives notification within 24 hours. The document specifies the exact date and 7-day window during which the execution will occur. Once served, the psychological countdown accelerates. At Angola, this triggers the first phase of transfer protocol. The inmate remains in their death row cell, but security increases. Guards monitor more frequently. Psychiatric evaluations become mandatory. The prison wants to ensure the condemned person remains competent enough to understand what's happening to them. That's the cruelty embedded in the system. You must be mentally stable enough to comprehend your own death. If you break psychologically, they'll medicate you, stabilize you, make you sane enough to kill. Robert Lee Willie found this out. Executed December 28, 1984, just months after Sonia. His case also featured in Dead Man Walking. Court records indicate Willie fought his competency evaluation, understanding the paradox. The more mentally sound he appeared, the closer he came to the execution chamber. But Willie had something most death row inmates don't have: an exact date. Most condemned inmates at Angola live in permanent uncertainty. Appeals can take decades. Execution dates get set, then stayed, then reset. The psychological term is protracted uncertainty. Researchers comparing it to torture aren't being dramatic. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has classified extended death row confinement as cruel and degrading treatment. At Angola, men have waited over 20 years. Wilbert Rideau was one of them. Spent 4 years at Angola, 12 of those on death row before his sentence was reduced. In his memoir and interviews, he described death row as living in a grave. Every day identical. Every night wondering if tomorrow brings news of an execution date. The architecture reinforces this. Camp F is designed for sight and sound isolation. Concrete walls 18 inches thick. No windows facing other cells. The only view is a small opening toward the sky or the corridor. Condemned inmates can't see each other. Can only hear the occasional shout or the rattle of food trays. This isn't accidental. According to corrections design philosophy documented in prison planning manuals, death row facilities are engineered to prevent community formation. If inmates can't communicate, they can't organize, can't support each other, can't build the psychological resilience that comes from human connection. They deteriorate alone. In 2018, a study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry examined death row inmates across multiple states. The findings were unambiguous. 93% showed symptoms of severe mental illness after 5 years. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, psychosis, conditions that would be considered torture-induced in any other context. Angola's death row is no exception. Multiple inmates have documented their experiences through legal filings and advocacy groups. The descriptions are consistent. Time loses meaning. Days blur together. The mind starts playing tricks. Some inmates report conversations with people who aren't there. Others describe feeling like they are watching themselves from outside their bodies. One inmate, whose name remains sealed in court records, described it in a psychiatric evaluation. "I'm already dead. They just haven't made it official yet." That's the psychological reality of death row. You're not waiting to die. You're already in a state of death. The execution is just the formality. And then comes the notification. The transfer to Camp FS execution unit. The final 72 hours. When that happens, the psychological experience shifts entirely. Because now it's not theoretical anymore. Now the warden has set the date. Now the execution team has been assembled. Now the witnesses have been contacted. Now it's real. And that's when the architecture of death row reveals its true purpose. It wasn't designed to house criminals. It was designed to prepare human beings for their own extinction. The warden doesn't call ahead. When Burl Cain was warden at Angola from 1995 to 2016, he personally delivered every death warrant. Protocol required it. The condemned inmate had to receive notification directly from the highest authority in the prison. Cain described the experience in multiple interviews. Walking down that corridor in Camp F, the sound of his footsteps echoing off concrete. Every inmate hearing those steps. Every man wondering if the warden was coming for them. Because on death row, footsteps mean something. Regular guards walk with purpose but no urgency. Medical staff shuffle, but the warden walks with weight. The kind of measured pace that carries news you can't unhear. Gerald Bordelon heard those footsteps in 2009. Bordelon was unique on Angola's death row. He waived all appeals. Requested execution. Multiple psychiatric evaluations confirmed he understood what he was doing. The legal term is volunteering for execution. According to court records, Bordelon told evaluators he deserved death for murdering his stepdaughter. When Warden Cain arrived at his cell, Bordelon already knew. The death warrant specified January 7, 2010. Lethal injection. Bourdillon would be the first person executed in Louisiana in nearly a decade. The notification process follows strict legal requirements. The warden must read the entire death warrant aloud. The condemned inmate must acknowledge they understand. The document must be signed and witnessed. The inmate receives a copy. From that moment, the execution clock starts. For Bourdillon, that meant 30 days. But the psychological impact is instantaneous. Dr. Mark Cunningham, a psychologist who has evaluated over 400 death row inmates, documented what happens in the hours after notification. The clinical term is anticipatory death anxiety. It manifests as physical symptoms: rapid heartbeat, hyperventilation, dissociation, acute panic responses. Some inmates collapse. Others go silent. A few become combative. Bourdillon, according to prison records, asked one question: when do I move? The transfer to the execution holding cell happens days before the scheduled death. Not weeks, days. The timing is deliberate. Too long in the holding cell increases suicide risk. Too short doesn't allow for proper security preparation. At Angola, the standard is 7 to 2 to 9 to 6 hours. 3 to 4 days of knowing exactly when you'll die. Jesse Hoffman received his notification in February 2025. Governor Jeff Landry signed the death warrant after 15 years of no executions in Louisiana. Hoffman's case had exhausted all appeals. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his final petition. The execution was set for the week of March 16, 2025. Nitrogen hypoxia. The new method Louisiana adopted after lethal injection drugs became difficult to obtain. Hoffman would be the first person in Louisiana executed by nitrogen gas. The first in the South since Alabama began using the method in 2024. According to Corrections Department statements, Hoffman was notified on March 10. 6 days. In those 6 days, the entire apparatus of execution mobilizes. The execution team begins rehearsals. These aren't metaphorical. Actual practice runs. Guards walk through the movements. The gurney is tested. The gas mask is fitted to a dummy. Every second is choreographed. Witnesses are contacted. Media is notified. The prison chaplain increases visits. And the condemned inmate waits. But here's what makes the notification period psychologically devastating. You're still alive, but everyone around you is treating you like you're already dead. Antonio James experienced this. Executed in 1996. In his final interview with a reporter, James described the shift that happened after his death warrant was served. Guards who used to make small talk went silent. The chaplain's tone changed from conversational to eulogistic. Even other death row inmates stopped calling out to him. He said it felt like being erased while still breathing. The prison system has a term for this: dead man walking. It originated at Angola. Guards would announce it when moving a condemned inmate through the prison. Dead man walking. The call served as both warning and classification. Everyone steps aside. Everyone goes quiet. You're no longer an inmate with a number. You're a corpse in transit. Sister Helen Pregene witnessed this with both Patrick Saunier and Robert Lee Willie. In her detailed accounts, she described how the men's psychological states deteriorated rapidly after receiving their execution dates. Saunier began writing goodbye letters compulsively. Willie oscillated between rage and catatonia. Both men asked her the same question: does it hurt? The state can't answer that question honestly because the people who could answer are dead. But medical evidence suggests the answer is complicated. Nitrogen hypoxia, the method that would kill Jesse Hoffman, works by replacing oxygen with pure nitrogen. The body doesn't detect nitrogen as a poison. You just stop getting oxygen. Proponents claim it's painless. Critics point to documented executions in Alabama where inmates struggled for several minutes before losing consciousness. Kenneth Smith was executed by nitrogen hypoxia in Alabama on January 25, 2024. Witnesses reported he writhed and gasped for approximately 2 minutes before going still. The execution took 22 minutes total. Hoffman would have known this. Death row inmates follow execution news obsessively. Every detail, every witness account. They are researching their own deaths. And unlike the rest of us, they can't look away. In the days after notification, Condemned inmates at Angola are offered increased mental health services. Psychiatric staff visit daily. Medications are adjusted. The goal, according to prison medical protocols, is maintaining stability. But there's an ethical paradox embedded in this care. You're medicating someone to keep them calm enough to kill. The American Medical Association has condemned physician participation in executions. The American Psychiatric Association prohibits psychiatrists from determining competency for execution. Yet prison doctors still prescribe anti-anxiety medications to condemned inmates in their final days. They're keeping you sane enough to execute. Baudelaire refused all psychiatric intervention. Court records show he declined medications, declined counseling, declined the prison chaplain's extended visits. He wanted to experience every moment of his final days with full clarity. Some see that as courage. Psychologists see it as a different kind of breakdown. When you're in control of nothing else, you try to control your own death. The notification period also triggers family contact protocols. Condemned inmates are allowed additional phone calls. Visit restrictions are loosened. At Angola, family members can request extended final visits. These happen in a special room, still separated by glass in most cases, still monitored. But the conversations are impossible. What do you say to your mother when you know the exact day you'll die? How do you talk to your children? What words exist for that kind of goodbye? Hoffman had family. According to news reports, his sister and mother planned to witness the execution. They visited him multiple times in those final days. No details of those conversations have been released. Some things remain private even in death. But the psychological research is clear. These final family contacts often increase distress rather than provide comfort. The condemned inmate sees their family's grief, hears their mother crying, watches their children trying to be brave. It makes the reality inescapable. On death row, you can mentally distance yourself from execution when it's theoretical, when it's years away, when appeals are still pending. But when your mother is sobbing through prison glass, it's not theoretical anymore. The notification period also brings media attention. Hoffman's case generated significant coverage. First execution in Louisiana in 15 years. First nitrogen hypoxia execution in the state. Advocacy groups organized protests. Clemency petitions circulated. Governor Landry received thousands of letters. Hoffman knew all of this. Death row inmates have access to news. They see the debates about their deaths playing out in real time. Imagine that. Watching people argue about whether you should live or die while you sit in a cell counting down the hours. Some death penalty opponents argue this period amounts to psychological torture. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has stated that the extended death row phenomenon violates international human rights standards. But in Louisiana, in Texas, in Florida, in Alabama, the system continues. Because the notification isn't designed for the condemned inmate's benefit. It's designed for legal compliance, for procedural correctness, for the state to demonstrate it followed every rule before taking a life. The condemned person's psychological state is secondary. And then, after days of waiting, after the mental deterioration, after the impossible goodbyes, the guards arrive. Time to transfer. Time to move to the death house. Time for the final 72 hours. The movement happens before dawn. Full guards. Full restraints. The walk from death row to the execution holding cell is less than 300 feet at Angola's Camp F. It might as well be 3 miles. The protocol is specific. Documented in Louisiana Department of Corrections Execution Procedures Manual. The condemned inmate is woken at 4 a.m. Given 30 minutes to gather approved personal items. Religious materials. Letters. Photographs. Nothing metal. Nothing that could be used as a weapon. Everything else stays behind. Jesse Hoffman was moved on March 13, 2025. 3 days before his scheduled execution. According to Corrections Department statements, the transfer occurred at 4:47 a.m. No incident. Standard procedure. But there's nothing standard about walking to your own death chamber. The holding cell is different from death row. Larger. Approximately 12 by 14 feet. Still concrete. Still barred. But with a different kind of isolation. On death row, You're surrounded by other condemned inmates. In the holding cell, you're completely alone. No voices through the walls. No calls echoing down corridors. Just silence. And the knowledge that the execution chamber is 30 feet away. Patrick Saunier described this cell in his final conversations with Sister Helen Prejean. He called it the last stop. Court records and Prejean's documentation show Saunier was transferred to the holding cell 72 hours before his execution on April 5, 1984. He told Prejean the worst part was hearing the execution team rehearsing, the sound of the gurney being wheeled, the click of restraints being tested, voices discussing procedure, all of it audible through the walls. They practice your death while you listen. The psychological impact of the holding cell environment has been studied extensively. Dr. Robert Johnson, a professor who spent decades researching death row conditions, documented what he calls the death watch phenomenon. Condemned inmates in the holding cell experience time distortion. Hours feel like minutes. Minutes feel like days. Sleep becomes impossible. Appetite disappears. The body enters a state of hyperarousal. Constant fight-or-flight response with nowhere to run. You're trapped in your own countdown. Robert Lee Willie was transferred to Angola's holding cell on December 25, 1984. Christmas Day. His execution was scheduled for December 28. Sister Helen Prejean visited him during those final days. Willie told her he couldn't stop calculating time. 48 hours. 36 hours. 24 hours. The numbers became an obsession. He'd wake up, when he managed to sleep, and immediately count the remaining hours. 16 hours. 12 hours. 8. The holding cell protocol includes enhanced observation. Guard check every 15 minutes. Suicide watch without calling it suicide watch. Cameras monitor continuously. The prison can't allow a condemned inmate to die by their own hand. That would deny the state its execution. You have to stay alive so they can kill you. Gerald Bordelon spent his final days in this cell in January 2010. Prison records indicate he remained calm, compliant. He'd volunteered for execution, waived appeals, accepted his fate. But medical staff noted his vital signs told a different story. Elevated heart rate, irregular breathing, classic physiological markers of extreme stress. The body knows what the mind tries to accept. The holding cell period is when final arrangements are finalized. Last meal requests. Final statement preparation. Witness list confirmed. At Angola, condemned inmates can request visitors during these final days, but all visits are monitored and time-restricted. The last meal has become almost mythological in execution coverage. But the reality is less dramatic. Louisiana allows reasonable requests. Most condemned inmates order comfort food. Fried chicken, hamburgers, pizza, food from childhood, food that represents normalcy. Bordelon requested a single vegetarian pizza. Court records show he ate 2 slices. Saunier requested shrimp and seafood. He barely touched it. Hoffman declined a special last meal entirely. According to correction statements, he ate the regular prison meal his final day. Some men find the ritual offensive. The idea that a final meal somehow makes execution humane. Like a condemned criminal gets to play dinner guest before the state kills them. Others see it as the last moment of choice in a life where every choice has been removed. During the holding cell period, the chaplain's visits increase. At Angola, the prison has both Catholic and Protestant chaplains available. The condemned inmate can request religious counsel from their faith tradition. Sister Helen Prejean served this role for both Saunier and Willie, though she wasn't official prison staff. The conversations in those final days are documented in her accounts. Saunier talked about his childhood, his regrets, his fear of pain. He asked theological questions without answers. Will God forgive me? What happens after? Does dying hurt? Willie was angrier, fought acceptance, raged against the process even while complying. He told Prejean the worst part was everyone being so polite about killing him. They call it the procedure. Like I'm getting a medical exam. The language of execution is sanitized on purpose. Transfer to holding cell. Not moving you closer to death. Execution date. Not the day we kill you. The procedure. Not strapping you down and stopping your heart. It creates psychological distance. makes it clinical, professional. The condemned inmate becomes a case number. The execution becomes protocol compliance. But in that holding cell, there's no distance. You're 12 feet from concrete walls, 30 feet from the execution chamber, 7 to 2 hours from death. And time moves in a way physics can't explain. The first 24 hours after transfer are the longest. The condemned inmate still has 3 days. Still has time. The execution feels distant enough to create a strange kind of hope. Maybe a stay will come. Maybe the governor will grant clemency. Maybe something will change. But Angola's death row has a grim statistic. Once you're transferred to the holding cell, the execution proceeds 98% of the time. The second day is when reality sets in. 48 hours left. Less than 2 days. The execution team completes final rehearsals. The witnesses are contacted with arrival times. The media assembles outside the prison. Your death becomes news coverage. Louisiana law requires the warden to inform the condemned inmate of the exact execution time 24 hours in advance. Not just the date, the exact hour. Jesse Hoffman was told on March 15, 2025, at 6 p.m. that his execution would occur on March 16, 2025, at 6 p.m. 24 hours. The psychological term for this is temporal proximity to death. Researchers studying terminal illness patients found that knowing the approximate time of death creates acute psychological distress. But terminal patients usually have weeks or months. Condemned inmates have hours. And they are not dying from disease. They are being killed by a system that's scheduled their death like an appointment. The final night is when most condemned inmates break. Not violently, not dramatically. They just break. Some cry. Some pray. Some go catatonic. Medical staff at various prisons have documented condemned inmates becoming non-responsive in the final 12 hours. Eyes open but not seeing. Physically present but psychologically absent. Dissociation as survival mechanism. When Patrick Saunier was executed in 1984, witnesses reported he appeared calm walking to the execution chamber. But Sister Helen Pregine described his final night differently. Saunier couldn't stop shaking. Couldn't speak in complete sentences. His mind had begun shutting down. The body protects itself the only way it can. In the holding cell, the condemned inmate can hear activity increasing. Guards moving with purpose. Equipment being prepared. The execution team assembling. All of it building toward the moment. Some prisons play music to cover these sounds. Angola doesn't. You hear everything. The final hours bring the final visitors. Family gets one last visit. Usually 2 hours. Still through glass. Still monitored. The conversations are impossible to document because they are too private for recording, too painful for accurate recounting. Mothers say goodbye to sons. Children say goodbye to fathers. Spouses say words that can't fix anything but need to be said anyway. And then the family leaves. And the condemned inmate is alone again. The final meal is served approximately 4 hours before execution. Most condemned inmates can't eat. The stomach rebels. The throat closes. Food becomes impossible. Bordelon's 2 slices of pizza. Saunier's untouched seafood. These become the final gestures of humanity in an inhuman process. 2 hours before execution, the condemned inmate is allowed to shower. The symbolism isn't lost. Cleaning the body before destroying it. Some inmates refuse. Others comply mechanically. The shower in the holding cell is monitored. Guards watch to ensure no self-harm. Even in the final hours, you're not trusted with your own life. After the shower, the condemned inmate is given fresh clothes. At Angola, it's a clean prison uniform. Orange. The same color they've worn for years. But new. Unwrinkled. Like dressing a body for a funeral. 1 hour before execution, the warden makes a final visit. He asks if the condemned inmate has any last words prepared. Any final requests. Any questions about the procedure. Most have no questions. They've been researching this moment for years. 30 minutes before execution, the execution team enters the holding cell. 4 guards. Medical personnel. The chaplain if requested. They explain what will happen. Step by step. As if rehearsing it again will make it easier. You'll be escorted to the chamber. You'll be secured to the gurney. Witnesses will enter. The warden will ask for final words. The procedure will begin. Clinical, professional, sanitized. 15 minutes before execution, the walk begins. The door to the holding cell opens, and the condemned inmate takes the first step toward the execution chamber. The final transfer is complete. The room is smaller than you'd think. 15 feet by 20 feet at Angola. White walls, fluorescent lights, a hospital gurney in the center, windows on 3 sides for witnesses. This is where the state kills you. The execution chamber at Louisiana State Penitentiary was originally designed for electrocution. Gruesome goatee, they call the electric chair, used from 1941 to 1991. 8 to 7 men died in that chair. Then Louisiana switched to lethal injection in 1993. Now, in 2025, nitrogen hypoxia. The method changes. The room stays the same. When the condemned inmate enters, they are flanked by guards. The walk from the holding cell takes less than a minute. 30 feet. But witnesses who've observed executions describe those 30 feet as eternal. Every step measured. Every movement deliberate. The condemned person's face usually blank by this point. Dissociation complete. Patrick Sonnier walked into Angola's execution chamber on April 5, 1984. Sister Helen Pregine was there as his spiritual advisor. Her detailed account describes how Sonnier's legs nearly gave out as he crossed the threshold. Guards caught him, steadied him, walked him to the chair. He was strapped in while still semi-conscious from fear. The execution chamber has specific witness sections. To the condemned inmates left, victims' family witnesses. 5 seats maximum under Louisiana law. To the right, inmates' family and friends. Also 5 seats maximum. Directly ahead, media witnesses and official observers. Usually 3 to 5 journalists. The warden. The prison's legal counsel. Everyone watches you die. The psychological impact of this audience is rarely discussed. But researchers studying execution procedures have documented what they call performance anxiety in condemned inmates. You're not just dying. You're dying in front of people who came specifically to watch you die. Some are there out of duty, some out of grief, some out of hatred, but they are all watching. When Gerald Bordelon entered the execution chamber on January 7, 2010, he looked at each witness section. Court records and witness statements indicate he made eye contact with the victim's family members. He nodded once, then allowed guards to secure him to the gurney. The restraint process is methodical. Chest strap first, then arms, legs, head. Wide leather straps designed to prevent any movement. The condemned inmate is positioned supine, facing the ceiling. Some prisons tilt the gurney so the condemned person can see witnesses. Angola keeps it flat. You stare at fluorescent lights while strangers watch your profile. 4 lethal injection. This is when 4 lines are inserted. Medical personnel, not doctors, as the American Medical Association prohibits physician participation. Find veins. Insert catheters. Test the lines. The condemned inmate feels every needle stick. But Jesse Hoffman wouldn't receive injections. Nitrogen hypoxia works differently. A mask is placed over the face. Sealed tight. Pure nitrogen flows through the mask, replacing oxygen. The body doesn't recognize nitrogen as poison. No choking sensation. No burning in the lungs. You just stop getting oxygen. Proponents call it humane. Critics point to documented problems. Kenneth Smith, executed by nitrogen hypoxia in Alabama on January 25, 2024, struggled for approximately 2 minutes. Witnesses reported violent shaking, gasping, his body fighting for oxygen his consciousness didn't know was missing. The execution took 22 minutes total. Alabama declared it successful. Medical experts called it experimental torture. Hoffman knew these details. Death row inmates follow execution news with forensic precision. He knew Smith's case, knew the timeline, knew witnesses described Smith's final moments as disturbing, and he knew the same method would be used on him. Once the condemned inmate is secured, the warden approaches. This is the moment for final words. Not a right under Louisiana law. A courtesy. The condemned inmate can speak or remain silent. Most say something. A few words. An apology. A statement of faith. Some use the moment to declare innocence. Patrick Sonnier's last words. I don't want to leave this world with any hatred in my heart. I just want to say I hope my death brings some relief. Robert Lee Willie's last words. I would just like to say, Mr. Bork, I hope you get some relief from my death. Killing people is wrong. It makes no difference whether it's citizens, countries, or governments. Killing is wrong. Both men executed in 1984 for the same crime, both expressing regret in their final moments. But not all final words are remorseful. Some condemned inmates use their last breath to maintain innocence, others to express anger. A few remain silent. Gerald Bordelon, who volunteered for execution, spoke for less than 30 seconds. Witness accounts indicate he apologized to the victim's family, then said he was ready. The warden stepped back, and the procedure began. There's a signal system. In lethal injection executions, the warden nods to the execution team behind a one-way mirror. They can see into the chamber. The condemned inmate cannot see them. The executioners are anonymous. Volunteers from the corrections staff. Louisiana law protects their identities. They are not killers. They are following procedure. That's the psychological framework that allows execution teams to function. They are not choosing to kill. They are implementing a court-ordered sentence. The responsibility is diffused across the system. The judge who sentenced, the jury who convicted, the governor who denied clemency, the warden who oversees, the team member who pushes the button. No single person kills the condemned inmate. The system does, but someone still has to activate the gas flow. In nitrogen hypoxia executions, the process is mechanical. The mask is sealed. The nitrogen valve opens. Pure nitrogen floods the mask at a controlled rate. The condemned inmate takes their first breath. Nitrogen. Their second breath. Nitrogen. Third breath. The oxygen in their blood begins depleting. Medical experts estimate consciousness is lost within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on breathing rate and individual physiology. But consciousness is clinical terminology. The reality is messier. Kenneth Smith remained conscious and struggling for approximately 2 minutes during Alabama's first nitrogen execution. Witnesses reported he shook violently. His body convulsed. He appeared to be gasping despite the mask covering his face. Alabama officials later stated the gasping was involuntary muscle response, not conscious suffering. Critics asked how they could know. Dead men tell no tales. In the execution chamber, time distorts for everyone. For the condemned inmate, seconds stretch into infinity. The body's survival instinct triggers panic responses. Even if the mind has accepted death, the body fights. For witnesses, the experience is surreal. They are watching a person die by government order. Some witnesses report feeling complicit. Others feel justice being served. Many report nightmares afterward. The victim's family members often describe complicated emotions. Relief mixed with hollowness. Justice achieved but grief unchanged. Sister Helen Pregene witnessed both Sonia and Willie's executions. She described the physical process of electrocution in clinical detail. The smell of burning flesh. The smoke rising from the head. The body straining against restraints as electricity coursed through. Modern execution methods are designed to appear more humane. But appear is the operative word. Lethal injection was adopted because it looked medical, peaceful, like the condemned inmate was simply falling asleep. But multiple botched lethal injections have revealed the reality. When the drugs don't work properly, condemned inmates remain conscious. They feel the potassium chloride burning through their veins, feel their lungs paralyzed while their brain still functions. They die in agony, unable to move or speak. Nitrogen hypoxia was supposed to solve this problem. No drugs to fail, no veins to miss, just oxygen deprivation. But the body doesn't surrender quietly. Medical literature on hypoxia describes the physiological response. As oxygen levels drop, the heart rate increases. Blood pressure spikes. The brain floods with adrenaline. The body does everything it can to survive. Then the seizures begin. Myoclonic jerks. Involuntary muscle contractions. The body convulsing as the brain begins shutting down. Alabama officials called this expected involuntary movement. To witnesses, it looked like suffering. When Jesse Hoffman was executed on March 16, 2025, at 6 p.m., Witnesses reported he remained still for approximately 1 minute after the nitrogen began flowing. Then his body tensed. His hands clenched. His chest heaved. The movements continued for approximately 90 seconds. Then he went still. The execution team waited. Protocol requires monitoring for 5 minutes after apparent unconsciousness. They check for breathing, for heartbeat, for any sign of life. At 6:14 p.m., a physician assistant, not a doctor, entered the chamber. He checked for pulse, listened for breathing, examined the pupils. At 6:16 p.m., Jesse Hoffman was declared dead. 14 minutes from start to finish. The witnesses filed out in silence. The media representatives went to write their reports. Louisiana carries out first execution in 15 years. Nitrogen hypoxia used for first time in state. The victim's family left through a separate exit. Hoffman's family, his mother and sister, were escorted out by victim services staff. And in the execution chamber, guards unstrapped the body. Because that's what Jesse Hoffman had become. A body. The same transformation that happens to everyone eventually. Death comes for us all. But the state scheduled his. Prepared for it. Practiced it. Witnessed it. Documented it. The execution chamber at Angola has now been used for dozens of executions. Each one following protocol. Each one witnessed. Each one recorded in state documents. The room gets cleaned after each execution. Sanitized. Prepared for the next one. Because there's always a next one. As long as Camp F holds condemned inmates, the execution chamber waits. White walls. Fluorescent lights. A gurney in the center. The smallest room in the prison. And the deadliest. The body doesn't leave immediately. After death is pronounced, the execution chamber remains sealed for approximately 30 minutes. Protocol. The execution team documents everything. Photographs are taken. Times are recorded. The medical examiner completes preliminary examination. Then the body is transferred to a gurney and moved to the prison morgue. At Angola, the morgue is in a separate building. The body is transported in a vehicle, covered, through internal prison roads. Inmates in the yard sometimes see the vehicle passing. They know what it means. Another execution completed. The autopsy happens within 24 hours. Louisiana law requires it. The medical examiner determines official cause of death, examines for any complications, documents the procedure's effects on the body. For Jesse Hoffman, the autopsy showed death by asphyxiation due to nitrogen hypoxia. No unexpected findings. No evidence of prolonged suffering, at least not in ways a corpse can reveal. The body tells what it can. The mind's experience dies with it. After autopsy, the body is released to the family if they claim it. Hoffman's family did. His mother and sister arranged for cremation. Private service. No media coverage. Some families don't claim the body. When that happens, the state handles disposal. Usually cremation. The ashes are sometimes scattered in designated areas. Sometimes stored in unmarked containers in prison property. You can spend 20 years on death row, be executed by the state, and end up in an unmarked box in a prison storage room. Anonymous even in death. But the execution's impact extends far beyond the body. For the execution team, the psychological aftermath is documented but rarely discussed publicly. These are corrections officers who volunteered for execution duty. Some do it once and never again. Others participate in multiple executions. Research on executioners, the clinical term is execution participants, shows consistent psychological patterns. Nightmares. Intrusive memories. Difficulty separating the procedural nature of the act from the moral weight. They followed orders. Did their jobs. Killed a human being. Some handle it through compartmentalization. I was just doing my duty. The court ordered it, not me. I was one small part of a larger process. Others break. A former executioner from another state, who requested anonymity in interviews, described the experience. You can tell yourself it's just a job. But you go home and you remember their face. You remember the exact moment they stopped breathing. And you know you caused that. Angola doesn't publicly discuss its execution team's psychological state. But prison employees have access to counseling services. Usage increases after executions. The warden bears a different burden. Burl Kane, who oversaw executions at Angola as warden from 1995 to 2016, discussed his experience in multiple interviews. He described feeling the weight of each execution, the responsibility of ensuring everything proceeded correctly. He also described feeling the execution was necessary. Justice. Closure for victims' families. The moral framework that allows wardens to oversee executions requires absolute certainty in the system's righteousness. Any doubt makes the job impossible. For witnesses, the aftermath varies dramatically. Victims' family members often report mixed feelings. The revenge fantasy that watching the killer die would bring peace rarely matches reality. The person who murdered their loved one is dead now, but their loved one is still dead too. Nothing changed except another person stopped breathing. Some victims' families report closure, a sense that justice was finally served, that the debt was paid. Others report emptiness. The execution didn't bring their family member back, didn't ease the grief, just added another death to the tragedy. Media witnesses have professional distance, but many report being affected. One journalist who witnessed multiple Louisiana executions described the experience as surreal and haunting. Watching the state kill someone on schedule, with witnesses, with protocol, it normalized something fundamentally abnormal. You watch a person die, then you go write about it, then you go home to dinner. The cognitive dissonance affects even experienced reporters. Sister Helen Prejean, who witnessed the executions of Patrick Saunier and Robert Lee Willie, dedicated her life afterward to death penalty abolition. Her book Dead Man Walking and subsequent advocacy work emerged directly from witnessing those executions. She described executions as premeditated, ritualized killing. The state doing what it condemns criminals for doing. For the condemned inmate's family, the aftermath is devastating. Hoffman's mother and sister witnessed his execution. They watched him die, saw his body convulse. So the moment he stopped moving, then they had to leave the prison, drive home, continue living. How do you process watching your son die by government order? Research on families of executed inmates shows patterns of complicated grief. Shame mixed with loss. Anger at the system mixed with acknowledgement of the crime. Love for the person mixed with horror at what they did. And the knowledge that society sanctioned their family member's death. Supported it. Paid for it. Watched it happen. Some family members become activists, fighting death penalty laws, sharing their stories, trying to prevent other families from experiencing the same trauma. Others withdraw completely, can't talk about it, can't process it, just carry the weight silently. Both responses are documented in psychological studies of execution impact on families. Back on death row, the remaining inmates process the execution in their own way. When word spreads that an execution has been carried out, the cell block goes quiet. Every man on death row just witnessed proof that the system follows through. The abstract threat becomes concrete. They killed him. They'll kill us too. Some inmates become more religious after an execution, seeking comfort, seeking meaning, seeking any framework that makes the waiting bearable. Others become more desperate, file more appeals, grasp at any legal strategy. The proximity to death motivates action. A few become resigned, accept the inevitable, stop fighting. The psychological term is learned helplessness. When no action changes the outcome, people stop trying. At Angola, after Hoffman's execution in March 2025, 61 inmates remained on death row. 61 men now with updated proof that Louisiana's 15-year pause on executions had ended. The waiting game changed. Now execution wasn't theoretical. It was operational. The machinery worked. The state was willing to follow through. For those 61 men, Hoffman's death made their own deaths more real. The death penalty debate continues outside prison walls. Abolitionists point to wrongful convictions, to racial disparities in sentencing, to the arbitrary nature of who gets death versus life in prison, to the psychological torture of death row conditions. Supporters point to the worst crimes, to justice for victims, to deterrence theory, to societal retribution against those who commit the most heinous acts. The arguments haven't changed in decades, but the executions continue. Louisiana executed Jesse Hoffman in March 2025. The first execution in 15 years. More are scheduled. Other states continue their own execution protocols. Texas leads in total executions. Oklahoma resumed executions after pausing. Alabama pioneered nitrogen hypoxia. The American death penalty system continues operating. And at Angola, the execution chamber waits. The room has been cleaned since Hoffman's execution. Sanitized. The gurney has been prepared. The equipment has been tested. It's ready for the next condemned inmate. Because there will be a next one. As long as death row exists, executions will follow. The system is designed for this. Camp F holds the condemned. The holding cell provides the waiting space. The execution chamber delivers the final act. And the cycle continues. But here's what the system can't eliminate: the human element. Every execution is a person. Someone's son. Someone's brother. Someone's father. A human being who made terrible choices. Committed unforgivable acts. But still human. The state can execute the body. Can follow procedure. Can document everything clinically. But it can't erase the humanity. Patrick Saunier was human. Robert Lee Willie was human. Gerald Bordelon was human. Jesse Hoffman was human. They committed monstrous crimes. Destroyed lives. Caused immeasurable pain. And the state responded by destroying them. Whether that's justice or vengeance, closure or cruelty, necessary or barbaric, that debate will outlive everyone currently having it. But the executions won't stop. Not at Angola. Not in Louisiana. Not in America. The death penalty exists because society believes some crimes deserve death. And so the system continues. Death warrants are signed. Inmates are notified. Transfers happen. Executions proceed. The machinery doesn't stop. It just waits for the next name. The next case. The next person to walk those 30 feet from holding cell to execution chamber. Inside Angola. Inside Camp F. Inside that small white room. The execution chamber stands ready. The final transfer before execution isn't just a physical movement. It's the last journey a condemned person takes. From cell to chamber. From living to dead. From human being to procedure completed. And in that transition, in that final 72 hours, we see what the death penalty really is. Not abstract justice. Not theoretical deterrence. But the deliberate, scheduled, witness killing of a human being by the state. Call it execution. Call it justice. Call it necessary. But understand what it is. The end of a life, counted down to the minute, observed by witnesses, documented in reports. The final transfer. The last walk. The ultimate price. At Angola death row. This is the reality. This is the system. This is what happens in those final hours before the state takes a life. And tomorrow, somewhere in America, it will happen again.